Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for being here for what we are hoping is a first annual gathering of this group of folks who do so much for the city. I want to share just a few brief remarks. This conference is actually the brainchild of three people: Aaron Murky, Earl Millett from the Weinberg Foundation, and Kathy Brill from the Stellman Foundation, and we really wanted to acknowledge them. They are leaders among our foundation members, and we really appreciate their leadership on this issue in particular because it's such an important one and needs leadership. I also want to acknowledge that we're joined by Rachel Monroe and Rob Kelly with the Weinberg Foundation also, among other folks from Weinberg, so our whole Weinberg family is kind of here today, which is great. Earlier this year, we found ourselves talking about the great work that has been going on in the aging space in Baltimore over the past 10 years. And there's really a growing network of talented and committed nonprofits, public agencies, researchers, and advocates collaborating on some groundbreaking programs, including Cities for All Ages, housing upgrades to benefit seniors, Project Household, Called to Care, the 211 Maryland Access Point Ecosystem Project, just to name a few. Aaron, Earl, and Kathy wanted to have a time and a place where all the people doing this amazing work could come together, get to know each other better, and celebrate their accomplishments. So we're really all here today to celebrate you. We hope for three things to come out of this event: that everyone learns something new, that all of us meet new people and strengthen existing relationships, and this one is mandatory, I'm told. It was written into my talking points very deliberately, that everyone have a really good time this afternoon. So if you have a tag and a program, you are really ready to network and get to know people. Before we leap into the event, there are some people we would like to acknowledge in the audience. I want to start with our mayor, Mayor Catherine Pugh. Thank you for being here today with us and for working with us to elevate the issues challenging seniors in our communities. I believe Mayor Pugh is going to join me up here for a few minutes to say a few words. I'm going to also say a few more thank yous before I hand over the mic. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to follow my talking points. Members of the Baltimore City Commission on Aging. We're delighted to have several members of the commission here with us today. As you all know, the mayor and city council appoint commission members to advise the city on issues of importance to older adults. Commission members serve without pay and contribute many hours each year to help make Baltimore a better place for older adults. Their role is vital, and please join me in thanking the folks who joined us. Baltimore City Corps Fellows. Beginning in September with the support of the Stellman and Weinberg Foundation, Baltimore City Corps placed 9 fellows with agencies serving older adults in the city. Several of those fellows are here with us today. We've tagged them too, so you'll be able to find them. Please say hello. Quite a few of them are pursuing careers in the field of aging, and we want to keep them in Baltimore. I also want to welcome our session speakers. We have 4 experts leading our breakout sessions this afternoon: Karen Alexander on brain health, Michelle Douglas on public policy, Nancy Henkin on intergenerational programs, and Susan Donovan on Montgomery County's WISH program. The program you each received today tells you more about each of our speakers and the depth of knowledge and experience they're each bringing to the conversations today. One note on the group sessions: we are doing each of them twice. So if you go to your first choice and the room is filled, don't worry. Join another session and you will get another shot in the second round. Our speakers will also be with us all afternoon, including the social hour, and we've of course tagged them so you can find them, and they want to meet as many of you as possible. And finally, I want to thank our association staff who have played an important organizing role in this event: Janika Johnson, Elizabeth Heilig, and I need to give a big shout out to Jim McGill, who leads our convening work to bring partners and funders together, focused on issues impacting seniors, including this wonderful event. I know that Jim prefers to stay in the background. He wrote talking points and did not include himself in those talking points, but I inserted him, and I simply couldn't stand up here without acknowledging the incredible expertise he shares with our community of funders and partners, so thank you, Jim. And now it's my honor to welcome Mayor Pugh to the podium.
Before I share my few words, I'd like to present Celeste with this Mayor's recognition of the first Baltimore Aging Convening.
Thank you.
So let me just say thank you all for being here. What a great group of folks. And let me just remind you all, there are two fast-growing populations in Baltimore, 18 to 34, 55 years of age and older. And I always tell folks, I don't care how old you are, whether it's the baby who was just born today or the oldest person who lives in our city. We're all seniors in training. So how we treat our seniors is really important, because our prayer is that one day we all get there. And I'm so grateful that we have all of these folks in this room who are focused on how we make life in our city better for our seniors. Rachel, I think about the program that we unveiled last fall, I believe it was early, where we talked about helping seniors fix their roofs in their communities and how successful it has been. You know, I know that Michael Braverman will tell you that he gets a lot of texts from me from riding down the street saying 1821, roof falling down, what's going on, who lives there, 1703, such and such, what's going on here. Because what the reality is that many of our seniors want to age in place, and sometimes when you're on a fixed income, some of your needs are more difficult to meet. And so I'm really grateful for that program. And then I think about our Meals on Wheels program that I've actually taken time to participate in. And when you walk in, a senior says to you, or someone who is there says, thank you for providing me with a meal today. And then I think about our telemedicine program, Betsy, that we now have operating in many of our senior programs, because we're looking at how do we make sure that our seniors' health needs are being met and they don't have to come back and forth to the hospital. And we're growing it now. So I know that this afternoon you'll have conversations with each other about what you're doing and how you can collaborate. And more importantly, how we expand on what we're doing. When I think about the lack of senior living communities in our city, you know, you have to go to the counties or some other areas for some of the really beautiful senior living communities. And we're building some in the city. In fact, you should know that we've created our own $20 million housing trust fund, affordable housing trust fund, and another $50 million investment fund, neighborhood investment fund, because we believe that there are neighborhoods in this community, in our city, that have been underinvested in for decades. We want to make sure that we're accommodating growth in our city. And whenever I'm in front of a mic, I always have to tell folks, you know, my number one focus at this point is really driving down violence in our city. Too many illegal guns on the streets of our city. One life lost in this city is one life too many. And we want our city to grow. But it grows when we focus on those things that are important to all of us, and that is the quality of life. And many of the issues that you all will be discussing today is about the quality of life with the programs that you're providing. So as we're driving down crime, it's still trending downward in every category. We've lost some ground, I can tell you that for sure. And we're very close, and I was sharing this with Rachel, that we're very close to selecting our next police chief. But I also know that it's not just about policing. You know, when I think about the number of folks who are living on the streets of our city, whether it's mental illness or drug addiction, all of those issues we must address. Or the squeegee kids on the corner. As I tell someone, you know, I learned a lot of lessons last year when we were creating pop-up car washes and we weren't able to sustain them. Because what I recognize is that there are young people who stand on our corners, and this is what we learn. Some are homeless, some are dropouts, some haven't figured out how to go about the business of getting a job. But what I've said to them is that, and I said this to the Sun papers today, anyone impeding traffic in our city is illegal. It is illegal whether you are selling a bean pie, whether you are selling a newspaper, whether you are begging for money, or you're standing on the corner as a squeegee kid. It's illegal. And If the traffic has stopped and you ask someone, can you provide the service, and they say yes, that's one thing. But to slam somebody's car or to respond in a negative way is committing a crime. And I tell folks that we have a responsibility to meet their needs, but at the same time, we have a responsibility to teach them right from wrong. And so bad behavior should not be acceptable by any means. And so we're looking at how do we create sustainable programs that work for our young people, but more importantly, work for all of us. Because what we want to see is a growing community, a healthy community, a senior community that appreciates living in a city that cares about them. So again, thank you for your work, and I look forward to the outcomes and more importantly, your continued collaboration, because I can assure you that the work that you're doing makes a difference to the people who live in the city and the people who will. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our opening speaker, Dr. Linda Freed. Dr. Linda Freed is back with us in Baltimore, if only for a day. Many of you may remember Dr. Freed as the director of the Center on Aging at Johns Hopkins, before the Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health lured her away from us. During her time in Baltimore, Dr. Freed was a source of inspiration and expertise for those of us who are doing this work. Her many accomplishments are summarized in the program, but I want to point out two that are very important to us here in Baltimore. First, Dr. Freed was the designer of Experience Corps, a program that creates service opportunities for older adults in public schools to the benefit of both the older adults and children. And second, Dr. Freed is an international expert on the concept of age-friendly communities that produce benefits for people of all ages. Dr. Freed's topic today is Optimizing Aging, the Design Opportunity for the 21st Century. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Freed.
Well, good afternoon. Celeste, thank you for that very kind introduction. I couldn't resist coming back to see from New York to Baltimore to see so many friends and colleagues, and to be part of this opportunity of really the Stallman Foundation and Weinberg Foundation's goals of creating a network out of so many ambitious agendas to, I think, really start to envision a whole being greater than the sum of the parts. So I want to congratulate you, and I'm honored to be here. As the mayor just said, Baltimore, like most cities, our entire country and the world, is aging. More people are living longer. Right now, over 12% of Baltimoreans are 65 and older, and this group, more than anybody, knows that these numbers not only are going to continue to rise with increasing life expectancy, but there are already neighborhoods in Baltimore like Howard Park, Loch Raven, Edna Gardens, and Mount Washington where there are higher concentrations of older people, 15 to 17, even going toward 20% of the population of the neighborhood. So your visionary programs are really foundational to supporting the needs of Baltimore's older adults. I don't need to tell you that building the essential infrastructure of daily living in the new world that we're in, of longer lives and aging populations, is absolutely essential. And your vision for how to support aging in place, I think, is foundationally critical to being able to create what the World Health Organization has called for, which is age-friendly cities. Not just supporting aging in place, but valuing the goals of older people themselves, 80% of whom want to age in place, and building out a new set of capabilities and services that support people's ability to meet their goals as they age. One of the themes I would like to think with you about today is how doing the right thing, as you are all doing for older individuals, can also be intended and designed to strengthen communities, and how to design for the win-win of both at every turn. The goal, of course, of supporting aging in place also supports the broader community in which that person's home is embedded. In the U.S., 79% of people 65 and older are homeowners, which means, of course, if you flip it around, that a substantial proportion of homeowners in any community are older adults. I don't have the exact data for Baltimore anymore, but I knew it was out of date. But certainly aging in place is valued by those homeowners, but additionally, it's very clear from all the evidence that stability of home ownership is a key part of a neighborhood stability. And going back to what Mayor Pugh just said, a prime factor actually in curtailing neighborhood level violence is that degree of neighborhood stability. Members of this network have been addressing two key predictors of aging in place and residential stability, mainly, of course, the maintenance of housing stock and preserving an individual's function through the Capable program, which of course has high impact. And I think one of the next generation of questions is going to be, are there other pillars in addition to those two that need to be put in place? One of the national discussions is that there's a third pillar, which is to think about property tax rebates for lower income homeowners. So if you combine improved housing stock, preserving an individual's function, and making it affordable to stay in one's home, you have a full prescription for aging in place. But there are lots of other changes going on, both in terms of needs and what we know, and I'd like to share some perspectives on both of those. Many of you, and I was already in several discussions about this, are quite aware of those changing needs. One, as an example, which we, I think, nationally have to look at, is, as well as globally, is that we have an increasing number of grandparents raising grandchildren. In Baltimore, between 6 and 9% of children are being raised by their grandparents, and that actually in itself has the potential to threaten many dimensions of aging in place, as well as an older adult's well-being and residential stability. I pick on this as one example, but one very important example of how thinking about housing has to intersect with changing needs. For example, caring for grandchildren may mean one can't live in senior housing. And in addition, of course, we all know that a good proportion of the grandparents who are raising grandchildren were already living in tenuous circumstances, 35% unmarried, 14% living in poverty, along with their own challenges of ill health. So, and then they're being asked to parent grandchildren around education when they haven't been in schools in 5 decades or more. So it's a lot that they take on, and how we design housing, affordable housing, and learn new ways to support the altruism of these amazing people who are raising their grandchildren is really not a fully developed approach. There are many other changing needs, but I think this is a leading edge of one of them that makes us think about housing differently. And there are lots of legal options available to those grandparents, but not always accessible or known. And in addition, there are a lot of services that are needed for them, some perhaps obvious ones of support groups and mental health services, case management, sometimes less obvious in terms of navigator programs to help with access, and then, of course, issues of resolving food and housing insecurity, which they may have been experiencing even before they took on the care of their grandkids. Now, I'm using this example to add to the one I gave before to say that the supports that we provide for the grandparents simultaneously benefit the grandchildren and strengthen the communities that they're in. So when the caregivers in grandfamilies receive services and support, the children do better, and the family's more stable, and so is the neighborhood. These are all social, what we like to think of course, as social protections, income support and housing among them. And they're totally critical in a caring society to protect older people and meet their needs, and manifestations of the fabric of a caring society. But there are other pillars as well, which I'd like to think about. One, of course, is building the health and function of the older person to enhance the quality of their lives. I also have come to think that health in older age is actually the key in the lock that unlocks the opportunity to experience the opportunities of longer lives and to use the assets that we arrive at older age with. So I'd like to actually focus the remainder of my talk on designing what new thinking looks like, in my experience, for designing to both build health and well-being for older people and for the families and communities they're in. We've learned a lot about how to create health. When I was in training as a geriatrician, the argument was whether, in fact, prevention would work in older age. Now, that seems like 1,000 years ago at this point, and we know the answer is yes on just about every count. But how we think about actually building health for longer lives, which we now have, starts, I think, investing, as Mayor Pugh said, in the next generation of older people, through really building citywide life course approaches to prevention, as is led by Baltimore's great health department. We know now that those who arrive at old age healthy are tracked to stay healthy, and those who arrive at old age sick are tracked to get sicker. And we know that the right investments in prevention across the life course enables people to age with health. There was one stunning example of this that was published a couple of years ago from the U.S. Health and Retirement Survey, which reported that rates of dementia in older people in the United States decreased 25% over 12 years, from 2000 to 2012. That took my breath away. This tells us that there are significant parts of memory loss and dementia that are preventable. But the insight, I think, as to how and why is really critical here. These dramatic declines in dementia rates in the U.S. over only 12 years occurred in the subset of U.S. adults who had more than a high school education and had more financial and other resources and had likely benefited across their whole lives from healthier environments and prevention and health promotion. Now, that tells us that this is doable for everyone if we build the communities, the housing, and the health supporting environments that this subset of older people have benefited from along their whole lives and are now seeing real improvements in health from. This is highly a public health responsibility, since public health creates 70% of any population's health, and it's an essential investment with high return. But in addition, we now know what was argued when I was in training, which is that prevention works to the oldest of ages, whether we're talking about improving strength, balance, and mobility, or we're talking about preventing strokes, frailty, or dementia. Again, public health programs for prevention in older people, united with geriatric medicine and nursing, I think offer the next generation of home and community-based approaches to build health into the oldest ages. And this brings prevention through services, through activities, and through environments that make healthy options the easy ones for people to embrace and use. This starts, of course, with the basics of safe and supportive housing. Adds in integrated services like Capable provides, thinks more broadly about a healthful environment and challenges to health, including food insecurity, and adds up to age-specific interventions like benches to sit on along the way so people can go out and walk, and safe neighborhoods and sidewalks that people can walk on. All these start to add up to the design of cities to support function and well-being in older age. The catch, which we've also learned since I was in training, is that designs like these to build cities for successful aging are designs in which everybody gains. You design a city for older people. You've designed something that works for people who are young and parents who are pushing baby carriages. Everybody benefits, whether it's a city or a health system, from what older people need. I think the third approach for building health is to build what's now being called social infrastructure. And I'd like to focus on one particular thing because it integrates well with the kinds of, I think, with the kinds of initiatives that you've been driving and probably have had in mind a lot. I'd like to focus on social isolation and loneliness, which is one of the greatest challenges in our increasingly fragmented and high-tech world. Social isolation and loneliness, as I'm sure you all know, are significant challenges for older people, with about a third of community-dwelling older people in the U.S. living alone and experiencing, of course, the losses of spouses and their social networks as they age. But in addition, loneliness is an emotional state of social pain, emptiness, and sadness that occurs often in the context of social isolation, but not only. It occurs as a mismatch between what people want and their actual social relations, and leads to the negative experience of feeling alone and distress of feeling socially isolated. And these feelings of loneliness tend to be more intense in people who are socially isolated. One of the very interesting and important things that has been learned about loneliness is that there are three types. Seems obvious when I say it, but one is just the intimate connections with an important other person, a spouse, a significant other. And when that's lost, there's a deep emotional loneliness. The second is social loneliness. So the presence or absence of quality friendships and family connections, the social network that we have in our lives that we rely on. And the third type of loneliness is what's called public or collective loneliness, the absence of meaningful connections with a group or a social entity beyond the level of me as an individual, so that I have a collective identity and a social purpose. All three of these types of loneliness are important to people. How each of us weights them is probably different. But the latter two, the collective loneliness and the social networks and social loneliness, are issues that can be designed for, and designs can help solve them. And I know a lot of you are working on that. But I wanted to explore for a minute what it really means. Because chronic loneliness actually makes you sick. It gets under the skin. It has negative behavioral effects. It creates a diminished sense of well-being, withdrawal behaviors, even negative feelings toward oneself and to other people, which actually hinder reconnection and serve to make loneliness last longer. It's also a risk factor for suicide and depression. And when people are really lonely for a long time, it threatens their own self-care behaviors. They're less likely to exercise, less likely to eat well and take care of themselves. And it silently disrupts our health. For those of you who are biologically inclined, it affects your neuroendocrine function, creates inflammation, alters gene expression and immunity, and through all these different mechanisms loneliness puts people at risk of cardiovascular disease, cancers, neurodegenerative diseases, frailty, and even death. So people who have high levels of loneliness are likely to die, are twice as likely to die within 6 years as those with the lowest levels. So people do die of loneliness. And in a world with a high frequency of isolation and loneliness, the newest evidence is that the significance for health and for the public's health is that it compares with the impact of smoking. Social isolation also increases external risks, which I'm sure many of you think about. For example, in the July 1995 Chicago heat wave, older adults who were living alone had a 2.5-fold higher risk of dying than those not living alone. And those who participated in community groups had a 30% lower risk of dying than those who didn't. So this is a big deal in terms of people's well-being and even their survival. And we know that social isolation and loneliness are increasing in society. In the 1990s, the prevalence of loneliness in the US was somewhere between 11 and 17%. It's increased to over 40% in the last 20 years in middle-aged and older adults. And it's an all-generation issue. More than 70% of 18-year-olds report recurring loneliness, 60% of people at ages 35 to 40, 40% of those over 65, and for those over 80, it increases to 50%. So, like hunger, loneliness has been compared to hunger. Like hunger, we should consider the feeling of loneliness to be a personal signal that we're painfully disconnected from others and that this needs resolution. It's a call to repair and replace social connections. But the good news is that the positive effects of social connection are more potent than its negative effects. So I'd like to suggest that in all our plans for housing in our neighborhoods in the 21st century, given this dissolution of social networks that we're experiencing in so many realms, that we need to intentionally design out loneliness in everything we do and design in social connection to counter all of these trends. These connections between people are what social scientists call social capital. The bridging and bonding relationships that we have that build connection and trust and are actually the foundation of a healthy community. If loneliness can be designed out and social capital built, the individual does better, and our resulting actions of connection can strengthen group cohesion and societal well-being. And it seems to me these are absolutely key goals. And there are many emerging examples of how housing is being rethought to foster both health and social connections, to build this social infrastructure. I'm sure many of you know this, but I'll just mention a couple. One I think of as the who's of housing. Who are we building for, and what are their needs? Like designing housing options that bring multi-generations of families together. Older adults who want to live near children, grandparents raising grandchildren, co-generational housing, friends, single older adults living together in new models of housing. And even rentals, with students renting a room in the home of an older adult. All of these are win-wins for everybody. And then I think about the house. How do we do it? There's this new movement of healthy NORCs, so-called, which is intending to design in physical and social environments that positively affect senior-sensitive determinants of health. There are lots of ways to design in health, but if you also think about designing an activity, the activity itself builds health. So lots of characteristics of healthy NORCs can be found. I'll mention a few. But the goals are to build a vibrant social community where the norm is community and engagement and connection, and that's not the exception. So designing in opportunities to participate in formal and informal physical and social activities between residents of a housing unit and with the broader community. Creating common spaces for gathering, locating voluntary opportunities within the housing. Establishing norms for connection within the people living in a housing facility. And actually zoning in instead of zoning out geographic isolation. So locating senior housing in areas that are dense with social activity, near public transport, grocery stores, libraries, and parks, so that people have the opportunity to be part of the broader community as well as the one they're living in. There are many other examples of how to do this, and I'm sure all of you are quite knowledgeable about them. But I think one of the things that we forget, which I'd like to mention, is that we need to think about how to bring older adults out into the community in new ways. So why can't schools be a place for older people when they're not being used, right, Nancy? They're empty from 3 p.m. on. Why can't many other parts of our civic infrastructure be places not just where older adults come by themselves, but where they are part of the activities, the vital programs that are being conducted? All of this, integrating older adults into the fabric of a community, is good for the older adults, but I can tell you all the evidence says that it is transformational for the community itself. It builds collective efficacy, it builds the ability of people to have social connections and social capital, and then beyond that, to be able to create norms of behaviors for their community and in their community and hold each other accountable for them. And that fabric of social connection and collective efficacy is what social scientists have shown is exactly the foundation that dampens the kinds of issues that Mayor Pugh was talking about in terms of risk of violence. So this collective dimension of social capital is a very important foundation, I think, of having both age-friendly communities and resilient communities. And we now have many emerging models of how to strengthen connections, and through this, the success of communities, and design it in a way that older adults want, but I would say always needing to design so that all ages benefit. So I'd like, in my concluding section here, to tell you what I think we've been missing in our designs. So I've talked about what you all do in terms of strengthening services, providing essential services to support the well-being of older adults. We're increasingly talking about how to design in social connection. To my mind, the missing piece in the design for a city of the 21st century that does well is understanding the assets that older adults bring for all of us and how to design in to really unleash them and for everybody to gain. So I'll start with a global image. Think about Nelson Mandela. Think about Jimmy Carter. Think about Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon. Think about Mary Robinson. Global leaders in many spheres who actually are part of a young organization which just had its 10th birthday, which is called the Elders. The Elders came together, the ex-Secretary Generals of the UN, ex-President of the United States, the founder and leader of South Africa, et cetera, came together to offer their collective influence and experience to support peace building, help address major causes of human suffering, and promote the shared interests of humanity. Peter Gabriel, who many of you probably know of, was one of the initial supporting organizers of the Elders. And he explained, and I quote, "In traditional societies, elders always had a role in conflict resolution, long-term decision-making, and applying wisdom where it was needed. Now, in our global village, we need our global elders." So hold this image of Nelson Mandela in your mind, and let's consider the implications of this group. Their mission is to create unified action by older adults to help resolve some of the world's most intractable challenges. The Elders as an organization demonstrate, I think, that our longer lives have created unprecedented social capital, which I would say our countries and our world desperately need. They offer a model that indicates how harnessing this energy might help secure the future that we want for our kids and our grandchildren, and be a critical foundation so that societies can age successfully. It seems to me that if we bring together in this networking event, this very important networking event, all of the different threads of evidence that now exist, we can weave together a strong fabric for a society that is built on the assets of longer lives. And through building on the assets can meet its goals and needs, and that this, to me, is the missing piece of designing a successful society and a successful city for longer lives, and is, to my mind, the design opportunity of the 21st century. And of course, the urgency of now is very great. Mayor Pugh just mentioned many of the issues at a national and global level. I'm sure we can all, without blinking, list 20 others that are worrying us. I certainly can. And we have so many examples of issues where systems were built for prior eras and leaders are struggling to create enough popular support or even identify the transformations that we need in the face of current and future realities. And in the face of all these pressing needs, the constant temptation seems to be to say that attending to all these old people in the world will not only, or in our city or our nation, will not only distract us, but also bankrupt us. So I'd like, first of all, I'd like to say the evidence goes in the totally opposite direction, and tell you why, but I'd like to offer that building for the vision of the elders in our communities will do the opposite of bankrupting us. So let me just tell you how we got to this aging society. It was a result of intentional societal investments over the last 100 years, through which we transformed our health expectancy and our life expectancy. Public health led decreases in death in childhood and childbirth from infectious diseases and environmental causes, coupled with more education, with poverty alleviation, and more recently medical care, have led first to survival to middle age, and now to longer lives. Almost every country in the world is now well past what's described as the first demographic dividend, when countries move from high mortality in childhood, generally in agrarian societies, to one with predictable declines in mortality, first in kids, then in young adults, then in middle-aged adults, and then people start living to longer lives. And as the kids survive and become a youth bulge of people working, we have what's called a second demographic dividend, which is what this country is thought to be in now. The assets of the second demographic dividend of more young working age people are thought to be, of course, a strong workforce and an accumulation of national wealth because people save more across longer lives. The challenges are that the power of this second demographic dividend is totally dependent on young people succeeding. And too many are undereducated and jobless. In fact, if you talk to leaders of developing countries, they explicitly worry that they're wasting their demographic dividend. And I would venture to say that in our local neighborhoods, we worry about the same thing. So when we're confronted with all these worries, it seems easy to miss the point that the immense achievement the society's accomplished in the 20th century is that we're approaching a world and a country where life expectancy is already 76 and we expect it to rise. And 20% of the world's population will be 60 and older in 2050. So what we learn here is going to matter to everybody in the world. But having accomplished this through intentional investments and sustained investments built on knowledge, we still don't have a vision for what the potential is of having created these longer lives, which we Now, there's a real mismatch. We all want the people we love to live longer, but at a societal level, we seem to think that it's going to bankrupt us and we can't afford it as a society. And that actually we're at the edge of a cliff. And so you have to ask a financial cliff of being able to afford all these old people. So I would actually like to posit to you that if we designed cities that were successful and unleashed the potential of longer lives, we could actually build something we never imagined before from having created longer lives, which I would call a third demographic dividend, where as the elders demonstrate, the assets and the critical mass of huge numbers of older adults can be the force we need for a better future. Now, there are many things, many myths and fears about aging societies which have been debunked. We used to think that jobs for old people took jobs away from young people. Not true. We used to think that dependency is the dominant picture for older people. Not true. We used to think that an aging workforce is less productive. Not true. We used to think that adding older people with younger people in multi-generational workforces wouldn't work. In fact, they're much more productive and innovative. And we used to think that investing in older workers was a loss leader. Not true. And finally, we used to think that designing just for older people was just for older people. Not true. And we know many positive things. Some are that older people want to keep going and they want to stay engaged, whether it's in work or civic engagement or many other things. And we have, even just counting numbers, an unbelievable opportunity because we have an older adult for every child in the world right now, for the first time in human history. What could that mean? And older people need to know that their life meant something and that they can leave the world better than they found it for future generations. So all of this wrapped up means that our assumptions and expectations of what longer lives might mean have been built on fears and generally debunked. And the evidence suggests that there are huge assets that older people could bring, but we haven't designed to experience them, either the individuals themselves or society. And we also know that older people don't seem in the main to want to retire, do nothing, divorce themselves from the needs of their family and the world. Rather, they want to stay engaged, doing things that give them a reason to get up in the morning and a reason to know that their existence on this earth matters to someone in addition to themselves. But we don't have roles for many of them. Many of them are doing things that they had no choice about, like grandparents raising grandchildren. And if you look around, we recognize that older people are deeply engaged. In fact, they're the fuel of our neighborhoods and communities. It doesn't matter whether you look at the countless older adults of all racial and ethnic backgrounds who are delivering the Meals on Wheels that the mayor mentioned, or you look at the many hours of service to others in the community through churches and synagogues and mosques, or you look at people volunteering in U.S. national service programs like foster grandparents and senior companions, or new volunteer programs like Experience Corps. The waiting lists are huge. The desire to serve is great. But for many, it's unmatched with the ability to find a role. So if we think about designing a society for longer lives, I think if we have the potential to design, to enable older people to make the difference they're uniquely capable of making, and to do it in a way that helps us tackle some of our problems that are unmet. I'll give you a couple of examples. Certainly from Experience Corps, now in about 24 schools still in Baltimore and in 24 cities around the country. what we have found consistently is that older adults who volunteer in a critical mass in public elementary schools in a program designed for high impact for both the kids and the older adults, that older adults consistently say that it's after a year of service that it was the most important thing they ever did in their life. Nancy Hankins is sitting here, who led the Philadelphia Experience Corps programs, and we both hear that all the time. The opportunity to make a difference can be created where we live through new kinds of roles where older adults bring assets that we never saw before in human history. It can be designed through things like a new movement called intentional neighboring, approaches to building new communities that create positive connections between people with the goal of supporting vulnerable people and the principle of it always involving 3 generations. One example is that the Generations of Hope Development Corporation has built a 3-generation model to support foster parents raising foster children, but always with older adults in the mix in these small communities, with the goal of strengthening our country's safety net one community at a time, building communities of kindness that bring out the assets of the vulnerable people in them through an intimate, fully engaged community that offers ordinary people a way to provide support on a daily basis for each other and really emerge with a sense of strength. The alternative isn't good. The alternative is the current role-less role of older age, which leads to ill health and depression. The contrary is that roles designed for impact, like Experience Corps, actually build health. I'll give you one example from Michelle Carlson, who's at Hopkins and has co-led Experience Corps with me for many years. And volunteers in Experience Corps show significant improvements in their cognitive function, their memory, their executive function, and activation of their brain even on brain scans after 9 months in Experience Corps. So such community-based engagement can be a way to drive health promotion into our communities, even while enabling people to get up with meaning and purpose and to help transform our communities' futures. So there are several principles I'd like to leave you with of what we need, I think we need to think about in the 21st century version of design for better communities. One is that generations need each other. And in everything we do, we need to make sure that we're building multi-generational solutions. And we leave a lot on the table. For example, if I think about, there's a Communities that Care model all over the US now, doing very important work of intervening for high-risk youth to prevent delinquency in neighborhoods. But they never bring in older adults into that mix. They're leaving a critical asset that could strengthen the success of the kids, the stabilization of neighborhoods, and actually take some of the weight over people in middle age who were running like crazy to try and meet all needs, feeling in the middle of a sandwich. The second is that we need to remember the assets that older people bring. Interestingly, we've never before had older people en masse, and we never had the data that says that as you get older, you have some unique assets of accrued knowledge, expertise and problem-solving abilities, experience in handling over a lifetime complicated problems, complex problems, and figuring out how to tackle them, and the subjective judgment about what you believe is important in life, as well as, interestingly, a dominantly optimistic outlook. This results in what's unique to older age, which is integrative thinking that can bring actually a new ability to creatively solve the challenges that we deem important. The other interesting thing is that as people get older, the evidence is that social reasoning improves with age. Older people make more use of higher order reasoning schemes that emphasize the need for multiple perspectives, allows for compromise, and recognizes the limits of knowledge, assets that lend themselves to social roles involving legal decisions, counseling, and intergroup negotiations very well. Now, these assets could be combined in roles and responsibilities with the generative needs of older age, a life stage associated sense of responsibility, as I said, to leave the world better than one found it and ensure a better future for generations to follow. It will take the right institutions, the right social infrastructure to enable these assets to be experienced by our communities. And there should be no program being built, no housing that's designed, no roles that are considered where older adults are not part of them, because everybody would gain. And the third asset is we have more older adults alive right now than have ever lived in the history of the world, if you add all ages together. Now that's an astounding fact. So we have this critical mass of people alive who have particular assets we've never before seen in human history, and we are ignoring them. So, in conclusion, I think that as we think about the design of cities, successful cities for longer lives, and how we create models, building out whether it's housing or roles or responsibilities or needs, and our ability to harness them. We can design out loneliness and social isolation, we can design in social connection, and we can build roles that older adults uniquely could serve in, and they will be better, and the communities they live in will be better. Thank you very much.